stuffed monkeys, and I know everyone wants one. So if you've lost your Rupert, we'd ask that you can describe the t-shirt that the little Rupert is wearing so that we just don't give it to the wrong person. So if you're missing your Rupert, please go see Claire or Maria at the desk. Shirts will be here this afternoon. We ask that you don't flood the table after the plenaries. We've got plenty of shirts. Don't worry, you're going to get one. So if you see a billion people there, you might want to just come back later. And next, Steve has some more key signing info.
Yes, just very briefly. So the deadline for submitting your keys for the key signing party was yesterday at 6 p.m. I did take some late entries, but if you didn't get an email back from me, you're not on the pre-printed form, which means if you want to participate in key signing this afternoon at 6:30, you will need to make your own arrangements to get some sort of paper that you can give out to people so that they know who your key, fingerprint, and associated name. If you still want to participate and you can, get it written down or print it out or whatever, you're still welcome to attend. But we only have the printouts for 36 people, which are the people who have actually signed up. If you don't already, since I've been handed the stack of actual papers, I'm kind of trying to get rid of them as quickly as possible here. So going around to the people I see that are signed up and handing them out. But otherwise, after the plenary, they will be back out at the front desk. And if you are signed up already for the key signing party, which is, by the way, a PGP key signing party, if that wasn't clear to people before, there was some ambiguity there. Then they will be available at the front desk for you to pick up. Please don't take them if you're not actually signed up for the key signing party, because that makes everyone cry. Question from Dustin.
Fingerprint on business card, is that sufficient? Not automatically?
Yes, if you have your fingerprint printed out in some form with your name attached to it and you want to trade, come to the key signing party anyway, we're happy to have you. We will have the room, I believe, only for a limited period of time, but since it's only a group of 36 doing the round key signing, that shouldn't take more than 20 minutes, I expect, and there'll be time for ad hocery after that.
Where is it?
Where is it? It will be in Hall 2 if everything goes according to plan.
Okay, thanks. Real quick before we start here, every UDS we try to recognize someone who's been doing a ton of work. And we've been asking around, and one name in particular keeps coming up and up over and over again. So we'd like to recognize Daniel T. Chen's work in this cycle. And he's also our next speaker.
Why Linux audio is somewhat of a bear. The title does not imply that Ubuntu's audio is any worse off than any other Linux distributions. But since Ubuntu, for some people, is the most popular and the best distribution, it's probably appropriate to talk about how we can work around and improve a lot of the symptoms and bugs that exist. So, number one, there's a lot of broken hardware. A lot. What I mean by broken hardware is we have the AC97 specification and the HDA specification. So we have the audio codec 1997-ish and the high definition audio, which used to be known as Azalea specifications. And basically, AC97 is what you used to have, actually I guess it is, what you still have in the older Sound Blaster Lives, the Turtle Beach Montegros, and all that kind of stuff. It doesn't go as far back as the Sound Blaster 16, unfortunately, but again, at least things, quote, still worked, end quote, then. Well, the bad news is that they didn't really work. They just kind of appeared to work. And things appeared to get a lot worse when HDA codec implementations came out. But for the most part, it was okay if you just used ALSA and not anything else. So to back up a little bit, What is ALSA? ALSA is the Advanced Linux Sound Architecture, which came about over a decade ago as due to a license disagreement, I would say, between Open Sound, Open Sound System, otherwise known as OSS, and because it wasn't very friendly to modifications and wasn't being maintained, a few people from SUSE decided that they were going to fix the whole mess. Well, they came up with something called ALSA, which is a lot more friendly to developers. Well, initially it was a lot more friendly. And it allowed developers to really go and tweak the knobs and everything, which is great, except for one thing. As time went on, it became more and more complex, and you suddenly have this beast of an API. It tends to be over-engineered, not very well documented, and maintained, but not really maintained. So, let's go back to the codecs. You have these two codec specifications. And for now, we're just going to kind of not look at what was around about 10 years ago and just look at what most everybody's sound hardware has now. So if you have a laptop or desktop or whatever that's within, let's say, 3 or 4 years old, there's probably a good chance you're running some sort of HDA controller and HDA codec. What this boils down to is when you buy a new computer and you get no sound, everyone throws up his hands or her hands as a user and says, I don't know what's going on, things are not working as they're supposed to be, what am I going to do? Well, first of all, when people really talk about no sound, what they're really saying is, I don't really know how to troubleshoot this, which is fine, because in Ubuntu, you're not really supposed to troubleshoot it, it's just supposed to work. But the reason that things don't work is often multifaceted, and we'll get to that in a bit. So the idea is that you have an HDA codec and it's supposed to be set up correctly. Most of the time, it's set up by your BIOS, but it turns out that BIOS manufacturers suck too. And I won't go into that. But anyway, a lot of times codecs are not initialized correctly, and so you have a lot of issues with that, and so you don't get any audible sound either. My favorite is different codecs from the same family driving the same sound cards often behave in exactly opposite directions. So, if you happen to have an SB Live, a Sound Blaster Live, or an Audigy, sometimes you have this one little mixer element control, this volume control. It's called the analog digital control. Now, it's really supposed to enable the optical output if you have it unmuted. It just happens to be that for some non-deterministic amount of hardware that if you actually unmute it, it works to drive the analog output, which is the exact opposite of what it's supposed to do for most cards. And there's no real good way to tell. We can't look at the codec revision. We can't look at the SSID, subsystem ID, or the sub-vendor, sub-device IDs, and make any sort of guess about it. We just kind of have to fiddle around. So what we do is we give it one base value and just hope it works for everybody. Now, we gave one value back in the gutsy, pre-gutsy days, and it worked for about 70% of the people, but it just turns out that the other 30% that it broke happened to be the people that complained very loudly about it, which is fine. Now it turns out, some years down the road, that the exact opposite is the intended behavior. Well, you can't fix it because you're going to break one portion of the users over another. And of course, then we have various devices that don't play well with your sound controllers, and you have other reasons as well. Most of which is closed documentation. We don't have access to some of the data sheets, which sucks. Well, another big portion is broken software. What do we do about broken software? So in Ubuntu, we have a crap ton of sound libraries, and they all talk to each other somehow. Now, if you can actually figure out what this diagram is supposed to be telling me as someone who just wants his sound to work, you're in a better position than me. Because as a user, I buy a new laptop from some computer store and I just hope it works. But I don't know that when I go install MPlayer that it's talking to one of these various audio output backends. And depending on which backend it uses, it might be talking to something else, which might eventually go to ALSA or the sound device or, whatever. So this is the situation that most people face today when they're attempting to use something. Of course, complexity is not something you should be smoking. Every time you try to fix something, there's a new regression. And of course, we're software engineers, it's black magic, whatever. So, another reason is, whenever you attempt to upgrade things in Linux, or what we would call the kernel portion known as ALSA kernel, then there's a pretty good chance that you also need to update the user space portion as well. And if you don't, you get some weird situations like in 8.04 where things just didn't work quite right. The good news is we're considering some backporting, so maybe it'll work out better. Maybe. For Hardy, that is. Of course, I've already mentioned the fact that the oscillator API is just not very well documented and it's fragile and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's not a great deal. My favorite, of course, in this slide is the fact that things like Skype and Flash don't really work with the ALSA API correctly. Well, since it's not well documented, you might find that you might expect that the Skype developers would go and ask the core ALSA developers what to do. But not really. See, what they did was they went and they used some random subset of the ALSA API and then decided to walk the proc A sound tree to see if it was okay to open the sound device, which is brain dead. I don't know why you do that. But anyway. And then we have the not in here. Let's reinvent the wheel problem. ALSA doesn't know it isn't sufficient for me, so I'm going to write something else, and then we end up with that huge diagram that we saw in the last slide. We also have bad configuration files. For instance, you can configure ALSA to do any number of things, which is great, but if you have Pulse Audio installed, it expects another set of configuration files that may not be compatible with the changes that you just made. And we're not going to even talk about the fact that T-Streamer is in another layer, and it might depend on ALSA, or it might want to talk to libAO, and libAO might want to talk to ALSA or Pulse Audio, and so on and so forth. And of course, my favorite is, I don't get any sound, so what do? I type into Google, or my little Firefox search bar, I don't have any sound. Well, Google's not very friendly unless you're actually looking for source code, because there's just so much bad information that maybe what you're doing is the wrong thing. Actually, more often than not, you are doing the wrong thing. Launchpad and other build trackers don't help because they have lots and lots of duplicates and additional comments by bug reporters that just don't really actually solve the problem. They just complain, which is great, but everybody needs a forum, right? And Ubuntu forums is not really your friend because it's not very well documented for anything except for Feisty. Feisty is end of life, so can't do anything with that. And of course, everybody asks, why should we use Pulse Audio? What does it actually give me? Well, that's a topic for another discussion. But what I will say is that there isn't one solution. But we can't really just take away sound completely, because there are people who actually like listening to music, and there are people who need music or sound rather, for accessibility reasons. And it's not going to work anytime soon. Also,
Sorry, what's the point of saying that?
this is all to get to why you should fix it and how. So just bear with me for about 30 more seconds. So we've had a couple of releases, let's say, and these things are, the issue here is that the release schedules are aligned with upstreams or disaligned so that we're continually getting just the short end of the stick. So how do we fix it? And this is the most important part. One, stop reinventing backends. What we really want is to just focus on two different solutions. If you're using a desktop and you're a developer, what you really want to do is program toward Pulse Audio. If you're a developer and you're writing a professional audio application, you want to use Jack. This is what we want to end up with. For the user, we're going to be messing with Pulse Audio on the desktop. Or with Jack, if you want to do professional audio recording. See, this is a lot more straightforward. It's a lot less complex because we just have everything working with Pulse Audio. We also need to decide whether workarounds are viable. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. And lastly, we also need to educate users that going around and searching forums is not necessarily the best choice. What we really want to do is make it easy for users to continue to troubleshoot. So we have 3 takeaways from today's audio session, which are 1, to hopefully realize some of the release schedules for upstream and or what we have in Ubuntu so that things work better. Another thing is to make it easier via checkbox for people to find out at what level something's broken. For instance, we'll automate, my microphone isn't working because there's a missing quirk in ALSA, so we can get that added. Or my microphone actually works with ALSA, but doesn't work with Pulse Audio because of some strange configuration issue. So this is all a quick way of saying that even though the picture is extremely, extremely bleak, it's actually much, much better than it was 2 years ago, which means in 2 years, we'll have a whole new set of problems. But they'll be easier to resolve because we have the infrastructure in place to resolve them and because we have a unified set of APIs to go forward. Okay, I'll take questions now. Steve.
It's great to say that this is what the model should look like.